Melissa, continuing to churn in the Caribbean Sea with lack of much movement. We'll take a look at the latest with this advisory, but still very much so Jamaica, Haiti, Cuba, especially Cuba and Jamaica in its sights.
Still safe to say, though, that Melissa is crawling through the Caribbean and not really going in any one direct path. We want to bring in Fox Weather hurricane specialist Bryan Norcross. Bryan, we've been waiting on some of these graphics to be updated. We were trying to get it all before the top of the hour, but now we are at a fresh hour, a fresh start. So let's talk about it. Do you make a big deal out of this east-southeast movement?
Well, I think it's continuing somewhat maybe good news for at least the eastern part of Jamaica. The issue that we were very, very concerned about yesterday was that it looked like this was going to be this very long period of heavy rain, which we still think is a threat, a big threat, a potentially catastrophic threat, actually. But then if you would add on top of that days and days of extreme winds on top of the rain, then you have a whole different level of potential catastrophe. And the longer that this system kind of dawdles and spins and reforms farther south, the better chance that the core of it will stay offshore of at least the eastern part where Jamaica's capital is, for instance, Kingston. And then we still have the question of what's going to happen on the western end of the island in terms of the core when it does eventually turn to the north. So the model shift to the south today is encouraging, and the storm, I was going to say the hurricane, it's not a hurricane yet, the storm seems to be going along with that, with staying in that general area. All right, let's look at it right now. Here's what we have from the 11 o'clock advisory. 45-mile-an-hour winds still, the 1,001 millibars, and east-southeast. Okay, east-southeast is in that direction at 2 miles an hour, but the direction is not so important. It's more that it is just basically stationary and perhaps reforming under this cluster of thunderstorms as part of the eventual organizing and intensification process. That's the thing. We'll also have this big cluster of thunderstorms out here, and this has been part of an outer band that has been tormenting the Dominican Republic, still in the vicinity there of that southern coast. So we'll see, as long as this thing sits here, then we have this threat of more flooding there along that coast. Eventually, the idea is, of course, that the system moves south of Jamaica and perhaps pulls the moisture away from the Dominican Republic. All right, looking at it close up here, there's where the Hurricane Center puts the center. You can make out with the low clouds, these clouds in here, see them rotating around here. But hurricane hunters have been out there, so we have some confidence that that's where the center is. Whether that's going to be the permanent center or somehow it's part of a larger complex that's going to rotate around, that kind of remains to be seen. Disorganized systems are very uncertain in that way. From the Kingston radar, we can look out, and here's the storm out in here. So this is good news. You can see it kind of jumping around there, but there is the storm there. So if it doesn't come a lot farther north, you can see that the worst of that is going to stay south of the island at least for a while, maybe for a few days into early next week, if we look at the modeling. And the modeling is a little bit all over the place, but generally now south of the island. There's where the extent of the strong winds are, the 40-mile-an-hour plus winds, so you can get an idea of how big they are under all those clouds. So if the system is out in here and does some kind of thing like this and goes like that, then we're going to get kind of a fringing effect in Jamaica, as opposed to yesterday we were thinking something more like this, which would be a much worse track for the eastern part of the island, the capital of Jamaica, Kingston, right in there. Now, downstream, that's a whole sort of different story. Here's the way the moisture tracks out. Now, this is on the European model, which is significantly different downstream than the than the Hurricane Center forecast and some of the other models. So here we are today. Here's this moisture. I mean, the atmosphere here is just very, very moist. So all of this is feeding north, feeding toward Jamaica. So this is still going to be kind of relentless in terms of the moisture, but watch the center. Slow, 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 and then beginning a drift over to the west and maybe even southwest, according to the European model. Now, the Hurricane Center forecast keeps it a little farther north. So does the Google AI model and some of the others. So they've taken kind of a compromised position. But the moisture continues in from the east to the west against the mountains in Jamaica, that moisture running downhill. So still the threat of extreme rainfall. But with this, the core of the storm stays here reasonably far south of the coast. Even if it's a little farther north, it's still offshore. That's the really important thing. Now, looking farther into the future, here's where things diverge from the Hurricane Center. Notice that the European model keeps it farther south. I'm not saying that's impossible. That still would be in the cone. But whether it's way far south or more up here, very close to the western end of Jamaica, that's the question. The forecast, the official forecast, is going to bring it very close or over the western end of Jamaica up in this Tuesday time frame. Then the European model brings it north, but very slowly. Look, this is Wednesday and still in this vicinity. So we're not ruling out that possibility, but you can see this cold front pushing in here, and there's a strong flow in the jet stream there that indications have been that that's going to pick it up and move it more quickly. Hurricane Center has it way up here by that time. All right, let's look at the Hurricane Center forecast here in more detail. So again, we've split up the cone and put this line on because it's so smushed because of the slow movement. So the idea is intensifying some tomorrow, significant hurricane by Sunday morning, tracking south of the island, but not ruling out the windstorm and the double whammy of the rain and the wind over the island. But indications are of this more southerly track. And then by Monday morning, Category 4 hurricane, hopefully south of the island with the worst of it offshore, but not a guarantee. And then we extend the cone out, and now they're forecasting up to 150-mile-an-hour hurricane in this vicinity somewhere. European has it down here. Other models have it directly over the western part of the island. That's Negril, potentially Montego Bay, although Montego Bay is on the north coast, but still in that extreme threat zone. So the big threat, according to the current forecast, begin Monday into Tuesday, and then through Tuesday, and then by Wednesday morning, Hurricane Center has it up over eastern Cuba and proceeding toward the southeastern Bahamas. So in terms of the models, here's the Google AI model. You can see just kind of stalling in this area somewhere and then making the move to the west. And notice that's more or less where the Hurricane Center has it, maybe even a little bit farther offshore. Wouldn't that be great? But we look at not all those lines so much as we look at the consensus, especially when they are fairly compact like that. So well south of Jamaica, but then making the turn over the western end of the island. So the extreme threat would be the western half with the moisture and the track of the storm. If this is what works out, then over eastern Cuba as a strong hurricane, and then the southeastern Bahamas. There you can see the move there. We add all the other models. You see that the GFS insists on the right side here. We're dismissing that. We think that that is just the GFS reforming the storm in the wrong place. But the European tends to want to swing it out a little farther and north, but the idea is the same. The big threat here appears to be to the western end of Jamaica, but not ruling out the, first of all, the whole island of Jamaica, extreme threat from rain, but the wind threat appears to be mostly on the western end based on what we know now, but we hate to discount that possibility of it affecting Kingston as well. So there you see high odds. So look at the scale up here. High odds that it goes here south of Jamaica, but then makes the turn. And does the core of it come over western Jamaica, or does it just miss? That's an open question. Looks like southeastern Cuba, Santiago de Cuba, and so forth. Extreme threat possible there, and then into the southeastern Bahamas. Exactly where the core would go, obviously an open question because we're talking about several days in advance. So rainfall. Well, we still have this threat along the Dominican Republic, even a bigger threat, the Tiburon Peninsula in Haiti, just because of the continuous flow of moisture against those mountains. They already had more than a foot of rain in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, and flooding there. So this is on top of that. And then we look at Jamaica here, and where you see purples, you're seeing feet of rain. And don't look at the exact areas, but look, even on the southeast coast there, in the Kingston area, very heavy rain up in the foot to 2 feet range. And then this is based on the storm kind of moving north somewhere over here, and that flow really going in here somewhere in that part of Jamaica. But in any case, as all that tropical moisture interacts with those mountains, obviously that water has to come downhill. Very, very dangerous. And this is what people need to get in position by tomorrow to be ready to ride this out for a period of days. The main issue is, I wanted to show you this. This is when we get to Tuesday. Notice that the European model has the system down here. Hurricane Center has it up there. And if we go forward in time, the thing kind of separates, and the Hurricane Center is moving it forward faster based on the consensus of the various models. But we'll see whether the European is on to something, and this is actually going to be a slower moving event next week, or it's just kind of a glitch or in just a short-term change in this model here this morning. We'll see as things develop here this afternoon. All right, guys, so we're crossing our fingers here that at least for a while the system stays, the worst winds stay offshore, but the rain has already started, and it's just going to get more and more and more and more as we go through the weekend.
Yeah, and Bryan, real quickly before we leave you, one of the things that we found interesting in the discussion from the NHC is when it comes to the intensity, so noting it will rapidly intensify. I guess some questions in terms of exactly when we could see the deepest of that intensification, but noting every single Google DeepMind member showing the system becoming a Cat 4 hurricane or higher. Just interesting, right? Intensity always is, but the fact that some are hinting at a Cat 5.
Yeah, well, they're forecasting 150 miles per hour, and you always say that the forecast is plus or minus at least 10% at that range. So plus 10%, that's 165 miles per hour. You know, that's a strong Cat 5. So, yes, the fact that the storm is staying offshore makes it more likely to be an extreme hurricane at some point. Now, at the point that it's starting to turn north, that means that the jet stream is grabbing it. If the jet stream really grabs it, that tends to stretch it out some and weaken it some. So we'll have to see, you know, whether it's a Cat 4, honestly, or it's a Cat 5, and it's an extreme wind event on top of the rain event. Now, more of the rain is going to be on the eastern two-thirds of the island, and the extreme western tip probably get less rain just because of the shielding from the mountains, and they may get the extreme windstorm here the way this is working out right now. But obviously we still don't have a good grip on exactly where the storm is and how it's going to form, so all these forecasts are subject to change based on that. And I think by tomorrow the forecast hopefully will settle down because the storm will have actually developed and maybe developing a core. If it's going to be a hurricane, has to have a core that can be more easily tracked.
Yeah, because early in any tropical cyclone stage, that low could and has the tendency to move. You get some storms and then finding that opportunity to reform it. So it's perhaps no surprise when you look at it, but still a notable change with this advisory. We appreciate it. Fox Weather Hurricane Specialist Bryan Norcross for us this morning. Thanks, Bryan.